From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Ahead today, K-State's Brian Briggeman, and from the Kansas Cooperative Council, Brandi Miller. We'll talk about the availability of loans to agricultural producers and cooperatives under the new Paycheck Protection Loan Program, which is part of the federal coronavirus aid package. That was the subject of a special K-State webinar yesterday. Then we'll have highlights from the brand new Kansas Forest Service podcast. This first edition looks broadly at the mission of the KFS in the state, featuring the service's Jason Hartman, Bob Atchison, Ryan Armbrust, Mark Neely, and Cassie Wandersee. Later on, K-State's Charlie Lee will review a new study of golf courses as a preferred habitat for coyotes. It's all next on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Thanks for tuning in for this Tuesday edition of Agriculture Today. A mountain of questions starting to well up now concerning this new aid package stemming from the COVID-19 situation, as that aid might apply to farmers and ranchers. Speaking here specifically of what's called the Paycheck Protection Program, which will be administered by the Small Business Administration. Now, the Agricultural Economics Department at Kansas State University hosted an event yesterday which addressed a number of those questions. This was actually sponsored by the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center here at K-State and the Kansas Cooperative Council. And we have two individuals who were leading the charge on this webinar with us today to go over some of the things that did pop to the surface on this potential aid. Brian Briggeman is the director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center, and Brandi Miller is the president and chief executive officer of the Kansas Cooperative Council. Thank you both for sharing a few moments here. Brandi, we turn to you first and just have you, if you would, outline this Paycheck Protection Program, what it is, how it's structured.
Absolutely. So thanks so much, Eric. And as you mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program is managed by the SBA. It was actually established in the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or what we now know as CARES Act. It actually went live on April 3rd. So we've had this program active now for a little over a week. And there's a total of $349 billion authorized for the purpose of helping small businesses retain jobs and cover certain other expenses. So the program really provides small businesses, which are identified as 500 or fewer employees, with funds to pay for up to 8 weeks of payroll costs, including benefits, as well as pay for interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities. So payroll costs specifically for salary and wages are capped at $100,000 on an annualized basis for each employee and must be very carefully calculated for the PPP. Interest on mortgage obligations need to be incurred before February 15th, 2020. Rent under lease agreements enforced before February 15th, 2020, and utilities for which service began before February 15th, 2020. So that February date's very important.
Now, it's been clarified that agricultural producers and cooperatives are eligible for these PPP loans, and there is an attractiveness to these loans built in. Talk about the terms here.
Absolutely. So the reason why these PPP loans are so attractive is they can be fully forgiven when the loan is used for payroll costs, interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities. So those items that I've already discussed. So at least 75% of the forgiven amount must be used for payroll. And full forgiveness requires that the employer maintain or quickly rehire employees and maintain wage and salary levels. So applying for loan forgiveness is done through the SBA approved lender servicing the PPP loan, and proper documentation on all uses of the funds is necessary. So that's a very attractive component of this particular program for both cooperatives and farmer producers. I do want to note that if the loan must be repaid, the interest rate is fixed at a 1% rate, which is a very reasonable rate, must be repaid within 2 years. And then payments are actually deferred for 6 months. So no collateral is required and there's no prepayment penalties. Applying for the PPP loan is completed through an SBA approved lender. And so that's really important to find someone that is able to manage this process for you.
All right. Well, there are so many facets of this that we can't possibly cover them all today. We'll give some of the bare bones particulars of this program. Brian, I'd like to bring you in here on how the amount of the PPP loan would be figured and how it might apply to an agricultural producer situation. What can you lend in that respect?
Yeah, so the big thing that I took away from the webinar yesterday and hearing from the CPAs and the KFMA folks and attorneys, this is a loan that you are applying for. Yes, it has the opportunity to be fully forgiven, but you need to think of it as a loan. So working closely with an SBA approved lender, and then also your own personal attorney or tax professional is critical for farmers, for cooperatives, any agribusiness that's considering this, because there are a lot of steps to it and it's different. So you want to make sure that you are following the approach and what's laid out by SBA as closely as possible. So you need to make sure that you follow with those. And the expenses, we did have a good discussion around the expenses and what can be used to calculate on the loan.
And we do need to reemphasize this panel of expertise you had on the webinar really did lend a great deal to the discussion here. And there's a chance to view a video of that webinar we'll tell folks about in just a moment. One of the key elements of this is payroll expenses. Brian, talk about that if you would.
Sure. So many of your listeners, Eric, are farmers who are sole proprietorships or self-employed. And we did have the folks from KFMA on to talk about, well, how do you calculate payroll for a self-employed? And this is the frustrating part. There really is no guidance. There are approaches out there using Schedule F and Schedule C net profit, but there's really no guidance provided by SBA. In fact, before the webinar, I had a phone call with a SBA lender in South Dakota who's an agricultural banker. And his comments to me were, I think, quite fascinating. First off, he said the first SBA PPP loans they ran through were for all their Main Street businesses, kind of who this was envisioned to target. And then after the fact, we found out, well, oh, by the way, farmers also can be in this as well. So this is somebody who has great experience administering SBA loans. And he was sitting there scratching his head. Of, well, how do you exactly calculate payroll for a self-employed farmer? So unfortunately, there just isn't a lot of guidance. So that's why you need to work with an SBA approved lender who can provide you with advice that is the best that they can do.
A great deal of the dialogue in the webinar yesterday revolved as well around documentation for qualifying for these loan opportunities here. And again, whether you are a cooperative entity or an agricultural producer, that's going to be something that has to be navigated carefully as well, is it not?
Yeah, so documentation is what we spend a lot of time talking about too. Thinking about before we talked about the payroll costs for self-employed, what about non-payroll costs, right? So rent, mortgage interest, utilities. We have to have the service, as Brandi said, on or before February 15th. So you have to show proof of that. Cash rents. Cash rents do fit into this under rent, but you got to be able to clearly document it. Probably one of the things that was interesting to me and the thought was to think of this as different buckets, looking at different accounts and how we have to track how we spend these PPP loans. We need to be able to clearly show, whether it's in a spreadsheet or whatever set of documentation, that this loan was provided and used to pay for the appropriate expenses. Because again, that all brings us to that forgiveness side.
Absolutely. And as Brian mentioned, this has been kind of a a moving target, and it's been very fluid. So SBA has been providing guidance and then updating and providing guidance. And so we're still eagerly awaiting to see what the forgiveness guidance looks like. And that's really going to dictate how the funds can be used. But the SBA has set guidelines, which I mentioned before, on what areas or those buckets, to Brian's point, that you could spend funds on. And it's just important, again, around documentation to make sure you're tracking how you're using that money, because ultimately, I think what makes this so attractive is the forgiveness, and keeping track of that documentation will really help make that process a lot easier in the long run.
Brian, it's going to be imperative for producers, for cooperatives as well, to work closely with their lenders on this application opportunity and what's required to stay in good stead with this program if one qualifies. Those changes could be coming regularly, you're saying, so that dialogue needs to be regular as well.
Right. We're learning as we go. You have to consult with your SBA lender. They're the ones who are going to have the most up-to-date information. But it certainly is something worth having a conversation about. As we've said, there are some attractive items about this program, but you do need to have that conversation with those who provide advice because, like Brandi said, it's very, very fluid.
And as good background for an individual or a cooperative manager, say, Brandi, there is an opportunity for individuals to view that webinar, the video of it, at a couple of spots out there online as well, you say.
That is correct. So the video currently is living on Ag Manager's website, so it can certainly be viewed there. And it's also going to be housed on the Kansas Cooperative Council's website later this week. And we will be posting it with some updated notes collected over the course of the webinar.
Again, if you're looking for a title there, it was a webinar on the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program for farmers and cooperatives. By all means, check that out. And we appreciate the quick briefing right here, Brandi and Brian. And as more information comes forth on this, we perhaps will have you back for a follow-up. Many thanks for your time right here.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
Joining us from the Kansas Cooperative Council, Brandi Miller, and from the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center at K-State, Brian Briggeman. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. More shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. For 16 years, the Kansas Forest Service here at K-State presented a weekly segment here on this broadcast called Tree Tales, which discussed our underrated tree resources in the state, how to manage them. That series concluded this past week as it's transitioning now into a new informational service, a monthly podcast, which will provide even greater detail about tree resource management, about rural fire management, and all the other facets of the Kansas Forest Service on behalf of you Kansans. The very first edition of the podcast is being posted later today, and Agriculture Today will routinely air highlights from these. The moderator is the communications coordinator for the service, Cassie Wandersee, and participating in this first go-round with Cassie from the KFS, State Forester Jason Hartman, Foresters Bob Atchison and Ryan Armbrust, and State Fire Management Officer Mark Neely. The theme is what the service in Kansas Forest Service is all about. Here's Cassie.
Diving right in. In this podcast, we're going to explore our staff, what we do, our relations to each other and our natural resources and the people of Kansas and the other agencies we work with. So what is it for you guys about natural resources, forestry, wildland fire that gets you excited about your work?
I came in to get rich. Yeah.
Money, definitely money. That's what we're all here for. Bob, why don't you go ahead? I can see the wheels turning.
Well, and you may just want to ask one of us, Cassie, because we're so shy here at the Kansas Forest Service.
We're so light. We don't want to step on each other.
Yes. So I'm a second generational forester like Jason, and so it was interesting for me to end up back in Kansas back in 1990 to try that forestry hat on again in a prairie state where people really are wondering what the heck you're doing here. And, that's part of our job, continually explaining that on a daily basis. I work in the rural forestry realm, which involves both silviculture and agroforestry in Kansas. I think I've been drawn to this career, and it has grown for me in the number of years I've worked here, and my passion for it, based upon the obvious resource concerns that we have here in Kansas, associated both with erosion, soil erosion, water quality, water quantity, as well as the bit we provide from a timber product standpoint. At this point, I've kind of become somewhat of an administrator in trying to solve bureaucratic problems associated with providing services to our people. I think is some of our greatest challenges in government, frankly, and even though for some people it's very distasteful, I've come to find joy in circumventing bureaucracy without crossing the lines too far so that we can indeed serve the people that we're called to serve.
So how about you, Ryan? What gets you excited about your work?
Like most things about me, I guess, is informed by the way I was raised, which I'm sure is similar story to everyone else. I was raised on a farm. Full disclosure, that farm was in Nebraska. So I am one of these rogue Nebraskans working here for Kansas, but I do love it down here. But I love the seasonality and how things change. That's something I was raised with. Sometimes you cut hay, sometimes you feed cows, sometimes you fix equipment, sometimes it's all those things in the same afternoon. But what you end up doing every day looks a little bit different. And I really appreciate that about my job here, is that even if it's just responding to landowners or folks calling in with sick tree questions, what that looks like is different in January versus in July versus in October. And it's really, I don't know if I want to say fun for me, but I really enjoy how that changes, and you can anticipate some of it. And the more you do this, the better you get at getting out ahead of some of these things. And that, for instance, if we do some good outreach with some folks in, April or May about, start looking for bagworms, we know we're going to be able to solve that problem, and we'll get maybe fewer phone calls about what do I do about the bagworms that are destroying my trees in the middle of summer. And that changes every year. So there's a cyclical nature to it that we can sort of expect some of the same things come back every year. The trees are out there and doing good things for people. And the more we can learn about it, what's going to keep those trees from bringing all those benefits to the people and remove thresholds or remove sort of barriers to those things happening. It serves all of us better. And it's extremely gratifying, at least where I sit, to be able to see us all making some progress and getting better at that and getting more out of our trees and a few happier people. There's some big problems to overcome. And when it comes to growing trees in a prairie state, there's going to be challenges, but I don't think any of us are here because we shy away from challenges. We all kind of enjoy that, working in that realm, I think.
So Mark, what gets you excited about your work every day?
One is it's been a career, so it's just not like an each day excitement. It's something that all of us has kind of dedicated our life to. I was a little bit different. I'm from Ohio, and I can't say I went to school to know to be a forester. I went to school for natural resource management, and I did. I graduated, and I've been an agronomist. I've been a fish and wildlife biologist, a park ranger, an interpretive ranger, forester, and now the fire management. And so all that kind of lends to me being excited about facilitating change, hopefully for the better. And that kind of what drives me now is we've got some good momentum with the fire program. There has been a solid foundation built for a lot of years. And now in the past few years, some of the stars aligned and allow us to make some really good progress and move forward with the program. And that's what drives me now, is seeing, what we're doing, that momentum, what we want to accomplish, and actually making steps towards that. And sometimes there's setbacks, but that's with every job. We just had a fire last week. It was down in Barber County, same location that we had one of our historic fires. This year, we were able to send a contract tanker down there. Well, somebody posted on Facebook, one of the firefighters in that area, they took a picture of the tanker and they said the caption was, "We were so relieved to see this show up in the air." That's what enables me to have the continued passion to continue. That's awesome. That's, at the end of the day, that's what we want to do, is make it easier for folks to fight fires, to promote fire as a land management tool in the state. And so that's what drives me. It's awesome.
How about you, Jason? What gets you excited to come be our fearless leader every day?
Yeah, so to focus more on the now, because a lot of my how I got here would echo a lot of what's been shared by the other staff, but that's what is really cool where I'm at now is, this is just 3 of the staff and yourself included, Cassie. You can hear the excitement and the enthusiasm and the dedication that comes, and just being the person that gets to try to make their jobs easier the best I can and make sure they have the tools they need to fulfill the drive and the passion they have for the work they do. That's what's really cool about where I'm at now and what I hope to be able to continue to do.
That really brings me to the next point that I want to talk about. And Bob, maybe you've seen the greatest evolution of this across the agency is really looking at our mission and our direction as an agency. So I just want to read that out loud real quick. So for our mission, it's care of natural resources and service to the people through forestry. And I think in the last 6 to 8 months, we've kind of added on to the end of that and wildfire protection. So Bob, that mission, that driving force behind our agency, how does that influence your work or the way you think about the work that you do and the way you lead your program area?
The service part of our mission is central to our people. That's been my experience. Whatever that is about, people that seem to be drawn to forestry, to wildland fire, they're people who are generally focused on serving others. That is what I've seen is most important. My experience has been the people that we are able to serve are generally very pleased with their engagement with our agency because of what I've just described, because of that heart of service. And in regards to the evolution you're talking about, or that you ask about, what I have seen change, and I think really for the better of the agency, is I've seen our fire program really become a strong and prominent program within the agency. I don't think it always was that. And I think it is now. And I think because of that, it's going to continue to help us evolve and grow as an agency and be recognized by our other natural resource colleagues as a really important partner as we continue to use that as a natural resource management tool, both on grassland and in our woodlands.
From the Kansas Forest Service at K-State, that's Jason Hartman, Bob Atchison, Ryan Armbrust, Mark Neely, and Cassie Wandersee. The KFS podcast in its entirety will be posted at kansasforests.org. Again, at kansasforests.org. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. And over now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, before we talk more things coronavirus, let's begin with this week's crop progress and condition update for Kansas from the USDA. For the week ending this past Sunday, topsoil moisture in the state was at 6% surplus, 69% adequate, and 25% short to very short. Subsoil moisture at 6% surplus and 74% adequate, 20% short to very short. The condition of the Kansas winter wheat crop this week, 50% good to excellent, 35% fair, 15% poor to very poor. Winter wheat now having jointed at 34%. That's behind the 40% for the 5-year average. And corn planting in Kansas, 6% in now. That is right on the average for this date. In its first national corn planting report of the season, the USDA is estimating 3% of the nation's crop has been planted as of Sunday. That's very near the average of 4%. And the USDA estimating 6% of winter wheat has now headed. That's slightly behind the 5-year average of 7%. The winter wheat's good to excellent condition rating remains at 62% across the nation. Some notable good to excellent winter wheat ratings in Nebraska and Oklahoma, both at 75%. Washington and South Dakota at 80%, Ohio at 74%, and again, Kansas, good to excellent at 50%. The USDA will spend up to $15.5 billion in the initial phase of its plan to bolster the nation's food supply chain against the impacts of the coronavirus outbreak, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. That plan, which could be announced this week, marks the Trump administration's first big push to ensure the pandemic doesn't trigger consumer food shortages, as meat packers are shuttering, dairy producers are dumping milk, and farmers are struggling to find workers to harvest and deliver crops. The initial plan will include direct payments to farmers and ranchers, along with other support measures, according to the report. And this is out of Reuters, by the way, using a portion of the $23.5 billion approved by Congress to support agriculture in a coronavirus stimulus bill last month, along with some existing USDA funds, according to the sources. The USDA will announce the initial plan as early as this week, says Reuters, and is expected to detail later phases of the support program once more money from the stimulus bill becomes available, potentially in July. This effort comes as supply chain disruptions caused by the spread of the virus have made it harder for producers across the globe to deliver food to consumers. Now, here in the U.S., as you know, several beef and pork packing plants have shut down as workers fall ill or in some cases die from the virus. Smithfield Foods, the world's largest pork processor, said on Sunday that it will shutter its Sioux Falls plant indefinitely due to a rash of coronavirus cases among employees there. And Smithfield warning the country was moving, quoting here, perilously close to the edge in supplies for grocers. And again, some dairy farmers have also been dumping milk because of a loss of their regular buyers. Laborers and truckers are in short supply. In this coronavirus stimulus bill, the lawmakers set aside $9.5 billion for the USDA to assist livestock producers, along with fruit and vegetable growers and others who sell through farmers' markets. The money is already available to the USDA and is expected to be part of the funds tapped in the program to be announced this week. The rest is expected to come from some $6 billion currently in the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation funding authority. Coming your way next, this week's edition of Milk Lines. Standing by with that, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today, I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the Paycheck Protection Loans that could be available to your farm. These come from the Small Business Administration, and it's part of the stimulus package that was recently enacted. There's been a lot of information in the last week or so about these loans, and as we continue to learn more about them, I would encourage you to consider them as a part of your financial plan as we go through the next few months. The real hallmark of this program is it is a way to keep people employed on your farms and provide some assistance as we suffer from some of the other issues that we have economically in the dairy industry. So in short, what this program does is it does provide a loan which could be forgivable that would amount to about 2.5 times the average monthly payroll on your farm. Now, you need to really visit with your local banker or lender. It could be the bank that you're currently working with, or it could be another bank, as long as they have approval to handle SBA funds. And most institutions would probably have that ability. So visit with them about the details, because the loan actually comes through a bank. So they will have the applications and necessary paperwork for you to complete in order to apply for that particular loan. Now, we're very specific to agriculture. If you do have H-2A workers on your farms, those do not count toward the cost of your payroll for this particular program. So as you visit with your banker, I would encourage you to make sure you understand what the guidelines are as to what counts as payroll expenses and what does not, because there are some things that are not counted in that. Also, it is limited based on the number of employees. You have to have less than 500 employees in your operation or business. And for many of our dairies, that will not be an issue. One thing that as this was rolled out early on in the first few days, there were some concerns about the limitations on annual income for a business as to whether or not they would be eligible for that. There's been new directives that have been sent down, questions answered basically about this, and for the farming operations, it appears that that would not apply as long as you were under the 500 employees. So I encourage you to visit with your bankers if you've not done that. I think it's something that could help us through some tough economic turmoil here as we go through the next few months. But keep in mind that while this loan could be forgivable, you'll need to meet the requirements of those forgiveness rules. So make sure you understand those carefully before you take the loan. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider utilizing the Paycheck Protection Loans.
All right, Mike, many thanks. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and shortly we'll take up another wildlife management subject with K-State's Charlie Lee. This is the K-State Radio Network.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, Amber Alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly wildlife management segment, provided, as always, by wildlife specialist Charlie Lee, K-State Research and Extension. This week, Charlie, on, of all things, golf courses as possible habitat and preferred habitat in some cases for urban coyotes. Is this part of the escalation of coyotes in urban areas that we've been talking about?
Well, I think this is part of lack of suitable habitat for wildlife species, including coyotes, in urban areas. And as urbanization increases, we know that natural, or what many would say would be preferred habitat sites, have decreased. They become more fragmented and typically not accepted as well by many wildlife species. So that makes green spaces like parks and cemeteries a natural fragment that wildlife can use. And golf courses are one of those types of green spaces that provide habitat needs for wildlife. That's food, water, and cover or a refuge. Thus, it's a very important habitat, even though it's a fragmented habitat for wildlife, such as small birds and mammals, and animals that are medium-sized predators like coyotes. There are some golf courses that are actually, in their management plan, often include strategies to develop and enhance wildlife habitat, and they promote that activity, that they're increasing biodiversity in these urbanized areas. And as a consequence, there's a wide variety of wildlife species that use these golf courses. But there's not very much information on animals like coyotes or medium-sized predators that are using golf courses.
So that was the inspiration behind a study you're going to talk about from The Ohio State University?
Yes, that was a research report that was published in the Wildlife Society Bulletin earlier this year. They had actually predicted that coyotes would select for golf courses and green spaces in these highly developed landscapes, and that they would decrease their selection of golf course use during the peak golf season, which would be spring and summer months, and then that they would use golf courses less frequently during the daylight hours when there was more humans present. And the study area was in the city of Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, where the Ohio State University has had a ecological study on urban coyotes that began in 2000. A project that's provided a tremendous amount of information about urban wildlife, particularly coyotes. They've been capturing coyotes opportunistically for those 20 years, captured over 400 coyotes in foothold traps and cable restraint devices. And those coyotes had been outfitted with VHF collars or GPS-type radio collars so that they could monitor movements. This particular study looked at 30 unique coyotes and their annual home ranges. Those would have been 19 resident coyotes and 11 transient coyotes, coyotes that had access to golf courses, meaning that the home range consisted of at least 3% golf course. So when they looked at the average habitat use by those 30 coyotes, the coyote home ranges consisted of about 61% developed land, 19% green space, and 20% natural or agricultural land. When they pulled out golf course as a different land class, on average, the golf courses were about 9% of a home range, and the urban green space was about 12%. So when they looked at the coyotes that used the golf courses proportionally in the least of the four land cover classes, about 11% of the locations were in golf courses. 35% of them were in the natural agricultural area, and then 31% were found in the developed land. So that shows that coyotes are using golf courses more than what the proportion of that home range would indicate.
So what does that suggest then about the issues that they may cause as they spend time on golf courses? Are there conflicts with golfers to the point of needing exclusion of some kind?
Well, their results showed that their hypothesis that coyotes would use golf courses reflected the patterns of human activity. There were periods of time of day and season that influenced coyote selection of golf courses. They avoided golf courses during periods of high human activity, like during the day or during the peak golf seasons. And that did not change as a result of the developed land within that coyote's home range. And there was a lot of individual differences or variation between coyote selection of use on golf courses and green spaces. Some coyotes showed a moderate use of golf courses, while other coyotes avoided golf courses completely, even during all seasons. So they suspect that individual animal variability supports using an individualized approach to managing these perceived human and wildlife conflicts that coyotes might cause. We know that some golf courses tolerated coyotes because they thought that coyotes helped them with rodent and Canada goose control, and other golf courses did not appreciate coyotes and typically removed them or harassed them so that they were on the golf course less frequently. So they suggest that in most cases, people and coyotes can use golf courses without conflicts, but in one situation during this study, a coyote had to be removed from the golf course because of habituation and aggressiveness.
So once again, as you're saying, it's a case-by-case situation as to whether the coyote in the golf course area would be an issue.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any way to predict that. Keep in mind, these situations can be influenced at the local level by the local course management plan, and that they did not suggest a overall guidance, but typically wait till they observed a behavior change in coyotes or aggressiveness that would indicate an animal really reflecting being a nuisance or a perceived risk before either hazing or removal of the coyote.
Well, this new study out of Ohio State lends some important data on coyote activity on golf courses. Charlie, thanks for reviewing this new work that's just been published. Charlie Lee is a wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Our time's away once again. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.